We're really pleased that so many of you have come along. We're going to talk about care experience and support at school. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to click slides. Here we go. So yeah, today's session. Oh, the timings are old timings from a previous webinar, but ignore that for now. So 4:30 till 6:30, 4:30 till 5:30 is the webinar part of today. And during this time, we're going to talk about a few different things. This part of the session is going to be recorded, so that gives people a chance to listen in or watch back later if they weren't able to make it tonight. And yeah, in this part of the session, I'm going to talk to you about care experience and is care experience an additional support need? Spoilers, yes, it can be. And we're also going to talk about how Enquire can help you in your role supporting children and young people with care experience. And I'm going to tell you a bit about Navigate, which is our new online hub. After that, we're going to have a little bit of a break. Probably like 5 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes, grab a cup of tea, and then we'll come back and we'll do a Q&A. You'll be able to write your questions into the chat, and I will answer as many of them as I can in that last half an hour from 5:30 till 6. Don't put your questions in the chat just yet, because hopefully I will answer lots of them as we go, but there'll be space in that break time to write in any questions that you have. But yeah, let's get started. So first things first, I'll tell you a little bit about Enquire. So you may have heard of us, you may not have, but Enquire is the Scottish advice service for additional support for learning. It's our job to provide advice and information to parents and carers, children and young people, and professionals who support families as well. And as you can see there, our vision is that all children in Scotland are supported, included, and listened to throughout their education. I also want to let you know that Children in Scotland is an important part of what we do at Enquire. So Enquire is one of Children in Scotland's services, and this is just a quick shout out to remind you, if you didn't already know, but Children in Scotland is a membership organisation that works across Scotland, not just in additional support, but all sorts of children's rights based work. We offer training and development, and we also have a membership program that gives you loads of different benefits, which I don't have the time to get into now, but yeah, do check it out if you're not already a member. There's loads of great stuff available for our members, and also a training program and development opportunities, even for people that aren't a member. Other little thing to tell you about is that Enquire is part of an organisation called My Rights, My Say. My Rights, My Say is specifically about supporting children and young people to have a say in their education, and quite often that's having a say in official and formal processes, like going to the tribunal, for example. Enquire is one branch of My Rights, My Say, but essentially they do great work across Scotland, and their focus is for children aged 12 to 15 at the moment. That's because of rules about capacity, children having capacity to have their say. But yeah, if you are working with children and young people that would like some support to share their views, have a look at My Rights, My Say as well. Okay, I've told you lots about us and what we do and what Enquire is a part of. Now I would like to ask you a few things about yourselves, mostly just because we're nosy. So we're going to jump across to Menti. Hopefully lots of you have used Menti before. We're going to do this a couple of times through the session. But essentially, go to menti.com and enter that code, but make sure you do it on a different device. Don't do it on whatever screen you're watching me on, because I might disappear and then you'll have to join us again. So yeah, in a new tab or on your phone on a different device, go to menti.com, put that code in, and you should see our questions. We've just got a couple of questions to start with, and then we're going to return to the Menti throughout the presentation. So our first question is, and I'll just move my face out of the way of that QR code, you can scan that as well, is what is your role? So in a word or two or three, who are you? Why are you joining us today? What is it that you do? And it should create us a beautiful like word cloud of all the different people that are joining us today. So yeah, if you get onto Menti, here we go. We've got a PT inclusion, primary teacher. We'll get some more comments and see. There'll be quite a mix of people today, I think. I think especially when we're talking about care experience, there's lots of different people who support care experience children, and they come from lots of different angles, I suppose. Yeah, it might be family members, it might be school staff members, it might be broader support systems, play therapists, I can see there, foster carers, adoptive parents, educational psychologists. This is a really, really great spread. It's really interesting to see where you've all come from. So thank you so much for filling that in. If you haven't joined us yet, you need to go to menti.com on a phone or on a separate tab and type in the code 46589955. And yeah, let us know who you are and what your role is in a word or two. Can see about half people have joined the Menti so far, and most of those have answered what their role is. Student teachers, youth work, parents, pupil support assistant. I actually used to work as a pupil support assistant myself before I joined Enquire. Foster carer, education outreach. A really, really great spread, and it's really interesting to see. And it'll be interesting as we go through. I imagine there'll be some areas where you'll have loads of experience or loads of understanding, and there'll be other bits that maybe you won't be able to, or that'll be new to you, or that you won't have as much depth of knowledge in. So hopefully today's session will be helpful for everybody. A really interesting mix there. I reckon we should skip over to the next question. I think if you log into the Menti, it will still ask you all the questions, so don't worry. The next question is, where are you joining us from? Our graphic designer Angus has designed us this beautiful map that hopefully on your device you'll be able to see. The green flags are all the countries of Scotland if you don't know your geography. Mine isn't great, so I asked Angus to put the flags on. But if you can stick a pin, I think you just click whereabouts you are. We're also interested to see where around Scotland we are reaching. You know, Enquire is a national charity, and it's really important to us that we do our best to make sure that everybody in Scotland knows who we are and what we do. So we want to make sure we're getting that reach across the country. And it looks like a really good spread. We did this at a session a few months ago, and I live in Glasgow, and Glasgow was very underrepresented, I have to say. But we're looking like a very solid spread this evening. Fantastic. Nice to see some northern faces as well. My family are from Aberdeen, so I'm always pleased to see anybody from up that way coming along to our sessions. About half of us have responded. A really good mix of people, and we're really pleased that we've got such a range of not only roles but also locations as well, because we know that things can be different depending on where you live and who it is that you're working with. Amazing, really lovely spread. Okay, our final question for the beginning is our starting point. We're using this as a sort of base measure, and we're going to ask you these questions again at the end of the session. And the sort of secret mission of it is that by the end of the session, you will feel better about these questions. So the first question is, I feel confident in my understanding of additional support for learning. So do you strongly agree with that? Right on the right-hand side, yes, I know everything there is to know. I am a genius expert in ASL. I know all things. Or do you strongly disagree? You know absolutely nothing. You've never heard of it before today, and you're coming along to get started on that journey of learning. Or are you somewhere in the middle? I think the way that we've set it up, you should be able to click somewhere in the center. So yeah, where are you in your confidence? The next question is, I understand care experienced children and young people's rights to support at school. Obviously, the focus of today's session is care experience. So when we're thinking about care experienced children specifically, how do you feel about your understanding of their rights at school? Obviously, care experienced children have lots of other rights as well, but today we'll be focusing on their rights at school specifically. Do you know lots about it? Do you know nothing about it? Where on the scale do you fall? And then the last one is, I know where to go for more information, advice, and support. Again, today, I'm hopefully going to tell you a little bit about where Enquire can support you. But at the moment, how do you feel? Do you feel like you've got lots of places to go to when you need it? Or do you disagree? Do you wish that you knew more places to look for when you do have a question or where you do want some more information about children's rights to support at school? I think these answers will stay anonymous, but I know that we sometimes do get like an average score in the back end. So it'll be interesting for us to see what that average score is looking like. But yeah, thank you all for answering those questions, and hopefully you'll see yourself personally that you increase your understanding and your confidence in care experienced children's rights. Okay, cool. I think that takes us back to the presentation. Oh, that was a jump scare. My face got really big. So we're going to move on the presentation now, and we're going to talk a bit more about Enquire. So just as an overview, we're going to talk about care experience children's rights. But before we get into that, I just wanted to shout out all the things that Enquire can do to help. We're going to share this information again at the end, and I'm going to email you it as well, so don't worry about writing things down. But Enquire, like I say, is a national organisation. We're all about additional support for learning, and there's lots of different ways that we can help you. The first way is through our websites. We have 2 websites. Enquire.org.uk is our website for adults. It's for professionals, it's for parents and carers, it's for anybody that's an adult that's looking to support children and young people. That website is mostly split into, there's a section for parents and carers and there's a section for professionals. What we tend to find is that the professional section leans more towards an education focus for people that are working in education, where I know that lots of professionals that support families more directly find the parents and carers section to be more appropriate for what they're doing. I suppose because they're coming, you know, if you're an advocacy worker or a foster carer or something, you're coming from that family side of things, where the professionals section of our website is those that are working directly in schools, in education. But yeah, loads of stuff on our website. We also have reach.scot, which is our website for children and young people. That's full of the same information really about children's rights, but it's just tailored for young people. So yeah, worth exploring with the young people that you support if they're interested to know more about their rights and want to do a bit of their own research. Reach.scot also has a TikTok account, so if any of you are cool enough and young enough to be on TikTok, then Reach.scot is our TikTok too. We also then have a helpline. You can give us a call. Lots of people find the helpline really helpful. I think the website is full of information, and you can, in theory, you can find everything you need, but sometimes it is nice just to chat things through, to talk to somebody and have that conversation about what it is you're after. Or it might be that you have a specific question or a complicated situation where you just want to talk through the steps, the things that you've tried, questions that you have with another person. I can speak from experience. I used to work on the helpline team. That our helpline team are all just lovely, kind, amazing, and very knowledgeable people. So definitely do get in touch with us if you would like to have that conversation with one of us. Yeah, you can call the helpline, and we also have a web form where you can send us a sort of a wee form email, text version of your questions, and we can answer those. And we have a web chat as well. And then the last thing to say is that we are on lots of social media and things. Do check us out. If you go to that Linktree link, that'll take you to our Instagram and our Facebook pages. Like I said, Reach is on TikTok. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to keep in touch. And I think one of the best ways to keep in touch with us is our newsletter that comes out roughly every 6 weeks. And it's aimed at everybody. So there's sections for parents and carers and for professionals. And that's just updates, things that have happened, changes to legislation, new blog posts, new pages on the website, new events coming up. That all goes out on our newsletter. So if you're not signed up to the newsletter already, you should be. And we'll send you a link to that in our follow-up email after today's session. Final thing to shout out before we get into the main content of today is our new piece of work. This is called Untangling ASL, and it's a project that we've been funded for by the Scottish Government as an addition to the work that we're already doing to try and help people get their head around additional support for learning and the specific information that people need to know. It's a set of downloadable resources, and there's all sorts of stuff, and there's stuff for professionals, there's stuff for parents and carers, there's FAQ cards answering the frequently asked questions about additional support. So yeah, I highly recommend you check those out, either for yourself or if you're looking to support other people to understand, or if you just want some quick resources that will give you the answers to those really, really common questions that we get at Enquire all the time. Okay. The final thing I need to talk to you about is Navigate, and I'm actually going to talk to you about Navigate all the way through today's session. So Navigate was a piece of work that we did through some additional funding. I imagine if you're all here for care experience, then you will have heard of The Promise, but The Promise was a piece of work done by the Scottish Government that aimed to understand and address issues of inequality related to care experienced people in Scotland. As part of that, we got some funding from the Cora Foundation and the Promise Partnership to do some specific work about care experience. And with that funding, what we did was we created Navigate. Navigate is an online hub, and it's all about care experience. It's full of information, and it's a real new sort of avenue for Enquire. We've got a lot of information on there in new formats. It's much more short form than some of our other content. There's a lot of video content on there, and there's loads of really great things. So yeah. There'll be a bit of time later in the break to check it out, but just so you know, most of the information that I'm giving you today, if it wasn't on Enquire already, it definitely is now, and it's all sitting in Navigate. Navigate itself sits on the Enquire website. So if you go to enquire.org.uk and you scroll down a little bit, it says, are you supporting a care experienced child or young person? And it'll take you right to it. Okay, let's get into it. Children's rights. Children have lots of rights, as they should, and under different pieces of legislation, there's lots of rights that apply to them. We obviously don't have time in an hour today to go through all the rights that children have, but they come under lots of different pieces. So the UNCRC was recently, I've forgotten the word, enshrined into Scots law, but there's also things like equalities law, the right to education is a long-standing thing. But today we're going to be focusing on the right to additional support for learning, or ASL. There's a couple of caveats to ASL, but I think for most people it will still apply to the children and young people that they care for, that they look after, they work with. Additional support for learning legislation only applies to children who are at local authority schools, or the one caveat to that sometimes applies is if a child is attending an independent school, but that place is funded by the local authority. So if a local authority is responsible for a child's education, then they are entitled to additional support for learning. So if a child is at an independent school that's being paid for by their parents or carers, and they're not entitled to additional support for learning, and the same goes for children who are homeschooled. If you remove your child from the school role, you're not entitled either. But that's not to say that Enquire can't help you. We do have information on our website for both of those circumstances too. But today we're going to focus on children who are entitled to additional support for learning, whose education is the responsibility of a local authority. So, additional support for learning, a quick definition to start us off. A child has additional support for learning, additional support needs where, for whatever reason, they can't benefit from school education without extra help. That's a really, really broad definition, and in some ways that's really positive because it essentially means if there's something getting in the way of a young person's education, they have additional support needs. You don't need a diagnosis to be entitled for it. It doesn't need to be a long-standing issue. It just means if a child is struggling at school or unable to get to school, unable to engage with their learning for some reason, whatever that reason is, they're entitled to additional support, and there's a responsibility then to provide that support. So that brings us to our next question when we're focusing about care experience, and I wanted to just define care experience before we get any further. Care experience is a term that describes anyone who has experience of living in care, no matter when this was or for how long it was. So there's some examples there: foster care, kinship care, which is when you live with a family member, if you live in a residential home, if you're looked after at home, so you still live in your home with your parents, but social worker providing some kind of support. But it also includes adoption, it includes secure care. A really broad definition, any experience of care, and that doesn't have to be right now, it can be years ago, it can be currently, it can be any time in a young person's life. If they've been in care, then they can be described as care experienced. I also want to mention the term looked after. That's a term that comes through, is used by the Scottish Government still, and that is the term that they use to describe children who are currently in care. And in some situations, there's particular pieces of guidance or legislation that apply to looked after children specifically. Today, we're talking about care experience in general. I also wanted to say here that we need to be mindful of the children themselves and how they would like to identify. Some people will be really, really pleased and happy and proud to identify as care experienced. Other young people might not want to, and it is totally up to them to decide how they identify. But we can be mindful that children who have that experience will still be entitled to support. It just means we want to be careful about the language we're using when we're speaking to them. So my next question, I'm actually going to put it to you. Is care experience an additional support need? Now, what I've just said is that care experience is a broad term, any experience of care, and additional support for learning is something you're entitled to if there's something getting in the way of your education. So really, it's a tricky one because essentially what I'm saying is care experience can be an additional support need if it's impacting a child's education. So obviously, care experience is a really broad circumstance, and it's certainly not my responsibility to determine that every care experienced young person will be impacted by that care experience or that care experience will be affecting their learning. I think the The evidence would show that in a lot of circumstances, care experience does have an impact on a child's education, and depending on the situation can have a very big impact, can have a very small impact, but there are lots of situations where care experience will impact on a child's education, but it doesn't necessarily. If, for example, that care experience happened a long time ago, they may not feel that there's any lasting impact. There may be. Like I say, it's a really broad thing, and it can apply in lots of different ways. But what I want us to think about is, if it can be an additional support need, how might it be? So we're going to jump back to our mentee. And the question is, how might a child's care experience impact their time at school? So there might be reasons it can, and what could those reasons be? Just be mindful, if you're putting things on here, to keep it anonymous. Please don't put anybody's name or any specific circumstances in, but yeah, some ideas. We've got some there already. So school moves can mean missed education, definitely. Mistrust of adults is a huge thing, I think. Yeah. Relationships can be so heavily impacted by a young person's experience. If you've had negative experiences with the adults in your life, and then you get to school and there's new adults to contend with, it makes sense that you would be skeptical of those people, or that you'd be nervous or mistrusting of them. Low attendance, definitely. Adverse childhood experiences or trauma, attachment issues, developmental issues, dysregulation, definitely. Struggles with peers. Yeah, these are all definitely reasons why care experience could get in the way of a young person's learning. Loneliness, yeah, that's a really good point. And with peers and friends I'm seeing as well. I think if you're moving a lot, there's a lot of impacts in lots of different ways, but friendships can be a big one. Mental health issues, yep, maybe vulnerable in a new setting. Yeah, I think any young person would find it really difficult to move around. But if you're a care experienced young person who has other, issues with your mental health, with your relationships, then that could be particularly difficult. And being different, yeah, if you are, there's an awareness, I think, for some care experienced children, that what's happening to them is unusual, or if it's not happening to any of their other friends, how do they relate to them in that way, and how does that affect their relationships? Yeah, some really interesting ideas, and I think I agree with what everybody's saying here. Definitely lots of different ideas. FASD is an interesting point to raise. Yeah, we did some work recently with the FASD, the FASD Hub, which is part of Adoption UK. They came along and helped create some content for Navigate. FASD is something that's quite common among care experienced children and young people, and they do some great work in sort of educating people on what FASD is. It's a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and it's when a child when a mother is pregnant has drunk alcohol, and that's affected the child's development. But yeah, the FASD Hub do some really great work on that issue particularly. Sleeping issues, yeah, is another interesting one. Some great responses. So thank you very much for everybody for answering those. Let's jump back to the presentation. So one of the things we did at Navigate when we first started the project was thinking about how care experience can impact a child at school. Statistically, it certainly does. If you look at Scottish Government statistics, for example, outcomes for care experienced children in education are much lower than the rest of the student population. They're more likely to be excluded. Care experienced children tend to leave school earlier as well. And they're less likely to be meeting their age and stage expectations as they go through school as well. So sort of statistically, they're not meeting the same levels and hitting the same targets as their peers. And there are lots of different reasons for that. One of the other things that we did as part of Navigate to find out more about care experience and how it might impact learning was talk to some young people. And one of the things that really struck me in those conversations, and it made sense, of course, but I think I hadn't thought about it, because I think when we think about care experience, I'm certainly so mindful of that mental health impact we talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences and trauma, emotional dysregulation, all these things that are happening, I guess, internally for that young person, how difficult that can be. And that's certainly a big part of it, and certainly something that's really important. But one of the things that was really interesting to me was a lot of the young people that we spoke to, it was more sort of the frustration with the logistics of the situation. So moving home, for example, is quite a stressful thing for anybody to do. Moving to a new school, having to make new friends, having to rebuild relationships, is all a big thing that's going to have an impact. But one young person, a few of them, we met with a group, and they were talking about how annoying it is to have to travel further, or like the frustration that like there was a sports day that they really wanted to go to, but they had a meeting with their social work and they had to leave school. And the meeting itself sounded quite difficult. They were having some really complicated conversations about their family situation, but they were also frustrated because they wanted to be at sports day. And I think sometimes it's the sort of practicalities and the logistics are getting in the way of a child's education, on top of and as well as all those mental health and emotional difficulties that can come with being care experienced. The other thing that I wanted to mention that's on this list, this is a piece that we did for Navigate as part of another presentation that I did previously, but is other ASN, other additional support needs. I think it's a very positive thing that as professionals, we're more so than ever aware of care experience and working really hard to meet young people's needs and recognize what care experience can do to a young person's childhood, how it might be impacting them at school. But we mustn't forget that care experience isn't the be all and end all. One of the young people that I worked with was, and this is kind of her own words of the situation, she was always getting in trouble. She was sort of known as a troublemaker. She was never paying attention. She wasn't listening. And she said that a lot of that, it was all put down to who she was and who her family was. She said that teachers would say, oh, you're from such and such a family. Well, of course, you're a troublemaker because, we know the reputation of that family, which in itself is not sort of the language that you would expect from professionals. But what was really interesting was that I think she was 14 or 15 before she was diagnosed with ADHD, which is wild because she was struggling with concentration. She wasn't able to focus in class. But there was this sort of stereotyping of her being a care experienced person, and that was the sort of reasoning for everything. And they didn't delve into what else might be going on. So I think it's really important to remember that, yes, we should talk about care experience. Yes, we should acknowledge what impact that might be having, but let's not forget that care experienced children are just children, the same as any other child. And as we do with all children, we should be thinking about what their learning needs are, how they're accessing their learning, what else is going on in their life that might be having an impact, and how can we make sure that we're meeting those needs as well. So just to sum up this first bit, is care experience an additional support need? It can be, and I would say it definitely can be. And you need to think about really that individual young person. Care experience, like I say, it's a really, really broad term. It speaks to so many different experiences. And what we should be doing is thinking about the individual needs of every young person and what their care experience means to them, how it's impacted them, and more broadly, what support they need at school. What are the barriers to their learning in this moment, and how can we reduce or remove those barriers? And yeah, like I said, remember that care experienced children might also have other additional needs as well. Okay, so we've identified that care experience can be an additional support need. And if it is an additional support need for a young person, what should happen next? So local authorities have specific duties under additional support for learning guidance and legislation. Local authorities must make what it says in the law adequate and efficient provision to support young people with additional support needs to help them do the best they can. And this includes identifying what a young person's needs are, planning their support, and then importantly, keeping that support under review. So what does that mean? What can support look like in school? The law doesn't say what it should look like, only that it should be adequate and efficient, and that it should be based on a child's individual needs. And there are lots of ways to meet children's needs. Enquire, we work in additional needs in the broad sense, and we know that additional support for learning has loads of different avenues and different meanings for different people. Additional support needs are really broad, and children can have lots of different needs. So we need to think about how we can. Oh, it says that I've frozen. A couple of people have stopped. Can you hear me now? Oh, it says it's back. Okay, I'll start this slide again. So what can support look like in school? The law doesn't say what support must look like, only that it should be adequate and efficient and based on a child's individual needs. So there's lots of ways to meet children's needs, and really it's about that individual young person. So what is happening for that young person? What are their needs, and how can we best meet them? There's some examples on the screen there, and hopefully You'll see that that's not an exhaustive list. It's just a suggestion of what might work. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to meet a young person's needs, and it's really about talking to that young person, talking to their family, and figuring out what's going to work best for them. I'm getting still some comments that people are frozen. There's a few people saying that it's stuck. I'll just wait a minute and hopefully it'll tick back over. Okay, somebody's saying all good. Hopefully it's working. Okay, we'll keep going, and it is recorded, so if you do miss anything, you'll be able to catch it there. Fab. Thank you everyone in the comments for letting me know that we're good to go. And yeah, that's a good idea. So if you are having issues, just close this version and go and re-click the link, and it should upload and join you back into the session again. Okay, so support planning. So we've said that care experience can be an additional need. If it is one, there's a duty to provide adequate and efficient support. But how do we do that? What should that planning process look like? So a child's support and their support planning should be based on their individual needs, as I've said, and support planning should be an ongoing process. I think one of the things that sometimes is forgotten is that support isn't a one-time thing. You don't have to decide on Monday, okay, this is what their support is, and we're going to do that, and it's going to work forever. It's a thing that should be regularly reviewed. If a child's needs change, their support should change, and those conversations need to be ongoing. They should be ongoing anyway, but I think especially for care experienced children and young people, there's lots of situations where their needs will change, whether that's in the short term or the long term, and you need to be mindful of how that might happen. So if something's happened at the weekend that's going to impact them on the Monday, it might be that that day or that week they need a bit of extra support with something. They need a bit of extra space if they need a soft start in the morning to help them settle in. Similarly, if a young person is struggling with something in particular and there's a process of assessment to figure out what that is, it might be that there's a bit of trial and error to figure out the support. It might be that you're putting through assessments for specific needs for dyslexia or for ADHD, for example. Those things can take some time. And while those things are in place, you can be trying different support strategies. Obviously, if you get a diagnosis for something, that might give you information to help you provide different support again. But yeah, essentially support planning should always be ongoing, and it should be regularly reviewed to make sure that what's in place is working for that young person. Who should be involved in support planning? First of all, the child or the young person should be involved, and there's lots of different ways for that to happen. Children are welcome to go to meetings if they would like to. They don't have to. I think meetings can be a very specific circumstance that even some adults would find quite stressful and quite difficult. So it's not to say that children and young people have to sit in a boardroom with a bunch of grown-ups and advocate for themselves. What it means is how can you listen to what they would like, what they want and what they need. Lots of children and young people know themselves very well. I think older children in particular will be able to say, I find this lesson really good because I get on really well with this teacher because this part of school is stressing me out because. But even younger children are able to speak to their own needs and their own wants. I've just done some work as part of another project, as part of the Inclusion Ambassadors with some primary school children. And obviously they don't have the same level of understanding of the education system as a whole, but they can tell you what a good lesson is and they can tell you what a good day looks like. And there's lots of different ways to gather that information. And similarly, there may be young people that aren't able to express themselves verbally, but that doesn't mean they don't have opinions and they don't have ideas about what they like. So whether that's having a chat with a trusted member of staff, whether that's drawing a picture, whether it's observation in class can be a really powerful way to figure out what works for a young person. However it's going to work best for them, talking to them, engaging with them and involving them in the process of support planning is not only something that you should do because it's what it says in the laws and the guidance, but also it can be really valuable because then you're building a support plan that's going to be effective for that child or young person. The next people that you should involve is their parents or carers. And in this situation, that means anybody who has parental responsibility. So sometimes on our helpline, we get a call, for example, from a kinship carer, somebody's moved in with their gran and the gran isn't sure if they're allowed to go to school meetings. If the gran is responsible for them, if they have parental responsibility, they're allowed to be involved in that process. And it can be really valuable for them. If they're at home with that young person, supporting them with their homework, maybe it makes sense for them to be a part of that process. I think bigger conversations can be had if there are multiple adults involved, and figuring out for those individual circumstances what's going to be beneficial and best for that young person in terms of who's involved is obviously a conversation that should be had on an individual basis. But yeah, if anyone has parental responsibility for a young person, they should be involved in that process. They're living with the young person, or they work with that young person. If it's a residential setting, for example, and they'll have information and understanding about that young person that can be really valuable. And then the other thing to mention is other professionals. I think especially with care experienced young people, there's a lot of other adults in their life that may be able to provide some valuable insight. Again, that's not to say that all those adults have to sit in a room together and all agree on a point. But if there is information from other professionals that can be shared, if they can attend, then fantastic. But for example, if there's a report from educational psychology, if they've been involved with NHS and there's some healthcare records that would provide some context that's useful to planning their support at school, then yeah, essentially, the more information you have, the better your planning can be. So making the most of the information that's available to you can be really worthwhile. A little caveat for that would be to be really mindful of who is sharing what and what does the child understand is going to be shared. Obviously, safeguarding rules apply and things sometimes need to be shared for safeguarding reasons. But you also want to make sure that where possible, children and young people have that agency to decide who's going to know what about them. One of the young people we worked with, there was an example of she'd had a conversation with, I think it was a therapist that she really trusted, and she thought that was a private conversation, and that was then shared publicly in like a tribunal setting, and she did not know that was going to happen, and she was really uncomfortable with the fact that was shared without her knowledge that was going to happen, and that really affected their relationship, and she didn't trust that therapist ever again, is what she said, which is understandable, because if you don't think that your private thoughts and ideas are going to be shared and then they are, that's a real big breach of trust. So I think obviously mindful of safeguarding situations where things do have to be shared. There's other situations where you can engage that young person and explain why you need to share it, or talk to them about what would be valuable to share when we're talking about planning a young person's support. The other big thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about support planning for care experienced young people is coordinated support plans, or CSPs. In Scotland, all looked after children should be considered for a CSP. So looked after, as I said earlier, is anyone who is currently being looked after by the Scottish Government, who is currently the responsibility, currently in care, is considered looked after. And if a child is looked after, then they should be considered for a CSP. Doesn't mean that they have to have one, but you need to sort of prove that they don't need one. The reason for that is that coordinated support plans are designed to, like the title says, they're designed to coordinate support across different agencies. So they're needed for a situation where a young person gets support from education and somebody else. So when we're thinking about looked after children, the likelihood is they will be involved with social work. They may also be involved with the NHS. But yeah, if they're involved with education and any other local authority, department or agency, then they should be considered for a CSP. To be eligible for one, you need to need support due to complex or multiple factors, and you need significant additional support. So it's not necessarily that every looked after young person will need a CSP, but it should be a conversation. Do they need one? And if they don't need one, why not? Are we sure that that's true? If they're not going to have one, do they need a different kind of support plan? How else are we going to do that? I'm not going to get into all the nitty gritty of CSPs today, but there are loads of information on our CSP pages on the Enquire website. And just Anna has asked, is it looked after children or care experienced children for CSPs? Legally looked after children must be considered for one. I would say that care experienced children, as with any other young person, if they meet these criteria, they can be eligible for one too. So a CSP can apply to any young person who meets the criteria. You have to make sure that a looked after child needs one or not. But for any other young person, you should consider it if they meet those criteria. And if they meet those criteria, then they should get one. If you're not eligible for a CSP, that doesn't mean that there's no support plans available to you. Our advice at Enquire is that really any kind of written plan can be helpful. Literally because it's on the page, it's set out clearly what the support is going to be and who's going to do it. One of the things to note is that local authorities call plans all sorts of different things. Every local authority names them slightly differently. Quite often they're called like individualized education plans, IEPs. Sometimes there's child plans. There might be stage intervention plans. There's lots of different language for it. Really, the most important thing is what support needs does that child have? Who's going to meet that support need? How are they going to meet it? And getting that written down in a place that makes sense. For some young people, and this is not just care experience young people, for some young people in Scotland, they have a support need that's very straightforward. There was an email chain agreed and it's sorted, and that's fine. It's going to work for them. They'll check in at the end of term, and that's all that needs to happen. For other people, there's a very complex situation, or there's some specific support strategies that are going to be in place. So having it written in a more formalized document in more detail is really valuable. So get a written support plan. What does the local authority have available that would fit those needs? Similarly, some children have healthcare needs, and some places have a specific healthcare plan that's designed to help schools and like NHS or health services work together. It's about that young person, what their needs are and who's involved. And then you can kind of find the plan that's going to suit that best. Sometimes there might be more than one plan needed to make that happen. For some people, they find a coordinated support plan speaks to very big, broad educational goals, and then it can still be valuable to have like a smaller individualized education plan that goes alongside that gets into more detail, that's more valuable for school staff, but the CSP is helpful for everybody else. As with everything, it is a conversation about what's going to work best for that individual young person. Okay, solving problems is something that we talk about at Enquire all the time. Obviously, our helpline is usually people that are in the middle of some issue that they would like to figure out a resolution for. And there's a few pieces of advice that we offer all the time. These are things that when I worked on the helpline, and I know the helpline team currently, these are the things we first suggest before we get into anything more complicated. Our first piece of advice that I've kind of already mentioned as we've been going on is that you need to listen to everybody. Everybody has an understanding of that child. They're coming from different directions, but hopefully everybody involved really cares about that child, wants the best for them, and is trying to help in that situation. Relationships can be complicated. Tensions can rise for lots of understandable reasons. But what's important is keeping that child at the center and remembering that we're all trying to provide information. We're all trying to get involved in this because we really want to do the best thing for this child. So how can we do that effectively? Talking to each other and sharing the information that we have. Parents and carers will have a great understanding in lots of circumstances about that young person at home. What do they tell them about school? What are they like at the weekend when they're full of joy, having a great time, enjoying themselves? How can we replicate that joy in the classroom? Similarly, classroom professionals will have such a great insight into the education system, into strategies that have worked with other children with similar needs before, with an understanding of that child when they're at school. And then, of course, the child themselves probably knows themselves really well. And even if they're not able to articulate in words, like I said before, listen to the way that they're expressing themselves in whatever way that is, and give them opportunities to have those conversations, or to be able to express how they're feeling, whether that's withdrawing or verbally or through observation, and putting them at the center of all these conversations is always the best thing to do. The next thing that we always suggest where possible is to have a meeting. Emails can be really helpful, telephone calls can be really helpful, but sometimes just taking the time to sit in the same room together and have a conversation for 30 minutes can really cut out some of that time it takes to go back and forth and back and forth. Not always easy to get everybody in the same room, certainly, but when it's possible, or when most people can attend, it can be really, really valuable just to have that focused time to say, okay, what is the issue right now, and what is the priority for us in terms of their education, and what are we going to do that? And then in brackets there it says take steps to prepare. So obviously that will depend on your role, but going into a meeting, knowing what it is that you want to talk about. Obviously with lots of young people, but with care experienced children, there might be 100 things happening right now, and you don't have time in 30 minutes or an hour to talk about 100 things. So what are the top 2 or 3 major concerns? What are the top 2 or 3 priorities? If a child is older and they're sitting exams, what exams do they care about the most? Do they need English and maths? Is that going to be the focus? But also, what do they love? If they love art, how can we make sure that they get the opportunity to do something that they love? With younger children, Is the priority helping them feel comfortable in the classroom? Is it their academic progress? Is it their friendships and managing a bullying situation, for example? What are the priority areas? And what do we need to know, and what can we prepare for that? So yeah, another piece of advice that we say to everybody is take some time before a meeting to write things down, make some bullet points about what you want to share, what questions you have, and take them in with you. And yeah, if you're a parent or a carer, you actually are able to take somebody with you to support you as well. So don't forget that you are entitled to do that if you would like to. And similarly, I think there's a lot of setups for staff that if they would like to take a supporter with them, they can too. So yeah, have a meeting and take some steps to prepare. Like I've mentioned already, written support plans can be really valuable because it keeps people literally on the same page about things. So we would always recommend that where possible, you write down a child's support into some kind of plan, whatever plan is going to work best, a CSP if they're eligible. And if they've already got a plan, then ask to review the plan that's in place. So what does it already say? Which bits are working and which bits maybe need to change? What needs to be added? What needs to be taken away? The last thing to say is that there is further advice and support available. Obviously, we've not got a lot of time today, but there are loads of things that you can do if things aren't working. And that's for everybody involved. There are different steps you can take. There's a couple of examples there. Assessing a child's needs can be really helpful. If something's not working, but you're not sure what it is, the process of figuring out what that need is really valuable. And you can do that through formal diagnosis, although you don't need a diagnosis to be entitled to support. Sometimes figuring out what that need is can be really helpful, or talking to an educational psychologist, for example, who can give some maybe more detailed insight than the class teacher is able to. The other thing to say is local authorities, that there is a process of escalation. So where an issue starts in the classroom, it might begin with a class teacher, but then there's usually principal teachers or department heads, there's head teachers, but then beyond that, there's also the local authority they ultimately have that responsibility to provide support. So yeah, there are steps through that process to get the support they need. And similarly for school staff, class teachers are not the only ones responsible. It is the local authority's duty to provide that support. So if you're struggling with it, if you're not sure what to do, your manager should help. But also, there is a series of management processes that should be able to follow through, and you should be able to get that advice from higher up the chain if you need it. And then the other thing that's mentioned there is mediation can be a really helpful service to use if tensions are high and relationships are broken down, and you just want that third party to come in neutrally and figure out a next step forward with you. There's a duty for local authorities to provide an independent mediation service, and we've got some information about that on Enquire as well. So yeah, there are lots of different steps available to you. We can help you figure out what those steps are at Enquire if you need us, and certainly they're all on our website too. Okay, so I mentioned it before, I'm going to mention it again. Navigate is where most of the information from today's presentation came from. I've shoehorned it into a presentation style, but actually Navigate is full of fun and engaging ways to get involved in this. There's lots of nice web pages. There's some really great videos. There's some draft email templates. So if you're wanting to ask about a CSP, there's a draft email template and you can fill in your details. My colleague Ellen has just put the link to Navigate into the chat there if you'd like to have a look. But yeah, please do check it out. We're really, really proud of it. And we hope that it will provide any information that you need about care experienced children's needs in particular. Okay,